What if I were to tell you the following is a real thing? A two-seat sports car with a crazy amount of torque and a suspension that has been tuned for an honest-to-goodness racetrack. But here's the kicker. They're only going to make 3,000 of them total for the world. What would you think that car would look like? So you will not be surprised to learn that is a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, direct-injected turbocharged engine. However, you will be surprised to learn 301 horsepower, comes in at 5,000 RPM, stays flat all up to 6,250 RPM, 331 pound-feet of torque. Yes, out of a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, comes in at 1,750 RPM, stays flat all up to 4,500 RPM. Now, one would think they just screw with the boost pressure and call it a day. Turns out they make a lot more changes than that. So yes, they do change the boost pressure, but they also rip out the fuel injectors and put in a much higher pressure fuel injection system. And those changes combined lower the compression ratio. Now, you would be correct in thinking, wow, that is going to be one stressed out small engine. Hopefully they're doing something about heat management. And there they address it in 2 areas. First, over on the lubrication side, they change out the oil sump so it's not shared with any other Mini, even though the block is. It's a much larger capacity oil sump. Then over on the coolant side, they add a larger electric fan that can process more hot air, and then they add an overflow coolant tank. Okay, so that's everything coming in. What about everything going out? There, they have changed the exhaust. I promise you will notice it throughout this episode, but the big thing that we should discuss, it's a straighter ducting and a larger silencer in the rear. Okay, so what does all this mean in terms of performance figures? Well, first and foremost, it does not change the fact that all that torque goes through just the front wheels, and that translates to just a tick over 5 seconds, 0 to 60, and then very interestingly, the VMAX, it is not electronically limited, 164 miles an hour. Very interesting punctuation to all that power. This at 2,625 pounds is one of the lightest Minis on offer, depending on how you express your weights and measures, 1,190 kilograms with that. Oh yeah, that's actually pretty good, man. You know what? There isn't a hell of a lot of torque steer, beautiful power delivery, kind of quick. Yeah, once you get up to higher speeds, it pulls a little bit over there. You can definitely tell it's a front-wheel drive vehicle or a lot of power going through the front wheels. But wow, there's really only one way to put this. It is a super fun delivery of power. It's not explosive. It doesn't come at the high end or the low end. It's pretty consistent all the way around the power band, but it just puts a smile on your face. Okay, so more power is always a good thing, but this, it is much more about a rather extensive suspension tune. Let's start with some of the more pedestrian changes and move up from there. Number one, all of the following are stiffer. The bushings, the anti-roll bars, the dampers, as well as the support bearings connecting to the front and rear axles. That in turn impacts 2 rather important items. Number one, increased camber both front and rear, as well as a lower ride height by 10 mils. And that brings us to one of the most unorthodox suspension changes I have ever seen on any car, bar none, because this one, unlike other cars, impacts the bodywork. You see, they increase the track width, both front and rear, and to hide that, they put these panels on the car, all 4 corners. I don't know if I'd call them attractive. We will talk about them more later in the episode, but they're definitely there. Now to one of the biggest changes, and that is increasing the structural rigidity of the vehicle, and this, they've done a lot. So number one, there is a huge brace over the engine. Number two, there is another brace that is in place of where the rear seat would be for the avoidance of doubt. This is only a 2-seater. And third, there is an aluminum rectangle brace that sits underneath the vehicle from about the midpoint to just under the rear suspension. And what's unusual about it is the scale of the brace in relation to the size of the vehicle. I would not be overstating that this brace is bigger in relation to this car than the same type of brace we saw in the BMW X5 competition. And then yes, they do fool with the computer tuning, specifically in the dynamic stability control. They add something called a GP mode, which raises the limits of all of the attributes that the dynamic stability control system tracks. And then last but absolutely not least, They add a mechanical differential lock to the transmission. Very simple concept. The idea is to send the majority of the torque to the wheel that has the most grip. All of that comes together to be much more than the sum of its parts. Yes, driving dynamics are definitely that of a Mini, but to a level way up here. And I would argue it's a little bit of all of the bracing underneath the car, but much more importantly, the mechanical limited slip we've got there, because there's virtually no torque steering. It does an unusually good job of masking the negative ramifications of putting a lot of horsepower through only the front wheels, but here it works, and works quite well. Now that we have that out of the way, back to all that bracing, and it does drastically change the ride quality. And this, it's not a good or bad, this is, what is your cup of tea? This is exactly my cup of tea. It's a very stiff ride, wonderful around corners like this, but still somewhat usable around town. Your wife, grandmother, girlfriend, they will not like it. But the person or one of the 3,000 people that are gonna buy this thing, they're gonna love it. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the Options Game with today's contestant, a limited edition Mini. This one, the 2020 Mini John Cooper Works GP for a base price of $44,900. Now, yes, that is quite a shock. However, this one has virtually every single option they make, including an automatic transmission. If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, no, you cannot get a manual transmission. And the other thing you can't get, a sunroof. Everything else is fitted as standard. Actually, power seats not fitted as standard, but you really wouldn't want them because you've got sports seats in there, and they're finished in this very cool two-tone gray with contrast stitch and this very British pattern to them. And then on top of that, red seat belts are fitted as standard. Thank you very much. Now the exterior, that's a bit of a different scenario. Any color you want, as long as it's racing gray metallic with a melting gray contrast roof. And then the inside of that very large rear spoiler is called chili red, and then all of the GP logos are finished in Rosso red for a British car that's built in Oxford, England. Anyway, let's press on because there are really no other options, although I do need to point something out. One of the items that's fitted as standard here cannot be had in other Minis, and that is the shifter paddles. Yes, one can have shifter paddles in other Minis. However, these are 3D printed, complete with an Art Deco pattern and the GP logo etched into each shifter. This is an incredibly nice detail. Would like to see more details like this. Anyway, we need to press on because there's only one thing to add, and that is the destination from Oxford, England for $850 for a total retail price of $45,750 for a Mini. I would be lying to you if I told you that I was pleased with the choice of transmissions here. Yes, it has been beefed up to work with this extra power through only the front wheels. It is well matched. I've been using it mainly in sport mode, and it's actually really good to use shifting the gears. Now, if I was looking deeply into a crystal ball as to why they made this decision, I do not think it was a function of, hey, we can't sell manual transmissions. They probably could sell more of these with manual transmission. I think the answer is more along the lines of they needed the automatic to manage the torque out of that engine. Now, the flip side of that engine and transmission combination is yet another change that separates the GP, and that would be significantly less sound insulation. This does not sound like a Mini, it does not sound like a BMW. I think for most car folks, they would not have a problem with the lesser sound insulation here. It's just at higher speeds, that becomes quite a bit of a sound chamber back there. It kind of sounds like an Italian car, an old one at that, because you can hear everything, even down to the details of the hot exhaust that pings when you drive it slowly. And then, of course, there's this. Yes, it is that time for us to address the elephant in the room, which would be design. Let's start with some of the less controversial items. The first would be the grille. Then there are GP logos. I've kind of lost count. There are so many. In the front, the back, the side of the car, they have these very stylized GP logo decals on the lower end of the vehicle. Then, of course, the wheels on the dashboard, the steering wheel, the seats. And if that were not enough, there is a GP indentation in the plastic on either side of the storage area where the back seat normally would have been. Then there's this in conjunction with the revised front air dam. These do work. The whole concept is to lower the overall lift. I do find this very interesting here because it's a front-wheel drive vehicle. And then last but not least, those panels on the side. They are made of carbon fiber reinforced polymer. They are specifically recycled from the factory that makes the BMW i3 as well as the i8. They are attached to a plastic panel which is attached to the vehicle itself. They are a matte finish. In person, you can kind of see what they were going for, but there is an oddness to it where you really gotta love this kind of Batmobile. You know what? It's not even a Batmobile. To me, this looks like the Bat Cycle, and I'm talking like Adam West Batman, not Tim Burton Batman. So I'm gonna turn this around to you guys here, and I'm gonna say, do you think this works, or does it not work? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments below, or via our social media, MOTOMAN TV, all one word, MOTOMAN TV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Another sizable change are the brakes, very much in line with M Performance brakes we've tested on many BMWs. So that translates to a bit bigger diameter rotors in the front, as well as different calipers. So it's 4 pistons in the front and 1 piston in the rear. And yes, you do notice some additional stopping power. It's actually quite good. I would argue really good for a track, but can't test that here. However, driving it around town, you do notice significantly better pedal modulation. I gotta say, I like this. I like this a lot. Yeah, I have a huge problem with 45 grand for a Mini, but even that I cannot hold against this vehicle because it is a limited edition, and if history tells us anything, they're going to sell every single one of these they make. The only things I could argue on, number 1, the sunroof, number 2, the manual transmission. And it's not the usual, oh, I want a manual transmission. It's the kind of person that is going to spend 45 large on a Mini. They are a person that drives a manual transmission. So future reference, if you're gonna make a limited edition, make it in a manual, and you probably wouldn't limit that limited edition so much. Outside of that, it is just wonderful to drive something that it makes no sense from any perspective, especially kind of the way it looks. But once you drive it, it makes all the sense in the world. Until see you next time, bis später.